Today, we're installing our new suspension and overhauling the entire braking system. Fun. Welcome back to the Auto Obsessive Garage. Chadwick with you again for another installment of Project Mariner Blueberry. And on this fun episode, we are gonna put in our new suspension and all its related new components as we took it all out last time. So it's time to make this Miata handle. And this is what you should be doing if you picked up a Miata. You just can't throw new struts on there. You just can't throw a new coilover system on there and sway bars and say, hey, the handling's gonna be awesome. There is some underlying concerns in that especially high mileage example you just picked up. So we're gonna install all that new suspension stuff, and the car needs to stop a little better. It's not in good shape, guys. So we're gonna go over everything braking, which includes pads, rotors, fluid, lines, and I got to do a brake master cylinder as a bonus. Cool. So what do you guys say? Let's get in the Auto Obsessive Garage and get some work done.
Before we could install the sweet new suspension setup, we need to remove the Racing Beat springs off of the old shocks and put them on the new ones. That required me using my favorite tool of all time, the spring compressors. Yep, I prefer to use the ones that could jeopardize my life. I like to live excitingly, guys. I like to live life on the edge a little bit. But seriously, as long as you're safe and go slow, it's not that bad of a process. And what we're left afterwards is 4 new Coney shocks with our Racing Beat springs installed.
Time to put our rear suspension back together. I'm gonna walk you through the logical way and the easiest way to do this. As you can see, my end link is not tightened up yet. We're gonna kind of save that for last. Another note, when you're doing end links on the car, you're gonna leave one whole side, that's one front, one rear, loose up here, and you're gonna tighten the rest. That way when you put the car down, you get the car on a flat surface, all the weight on it, roll it around till the suspension settles, and then you're gonna go ahead, reach under the car and tighten that. So just a pro tip, so you're not having to do that twice. But on this side, you're gonna see me tighten both of these. This is the side of the car I am tightening both the end links. Aside from that, suspension, we're gonna put our newly cobbled together Coney shocks and Racing Beat springs in first. That's the best way to do it. So you got a lot of play right here because the upper control arm's not connected, so you can push the lower down, stick the strut into the perch down there, and then my favorite thing to do to get the strut assembly up into the trunk area where you can tighten those bolts on the upper strut mount is to use a jack. So bring over your floor jack this up, and at the same time, I like to get it nice and high, get that like so this bolt can slide through the upper control arm. And at the same time, you're gonna be doing that lower strut perch bolt too. So that one's kind of a pain in the butt. Remember, we had to get access to it. So we're gonna do the opposite. Hold that nut with a 17, use an impact to start it, and then finish it with the hand tools to make sure it's torqued to spec. And then you'll be good to go, aside from just tightening those 2 bolts in the trunk, or those 2 nuts in the trunk for the top of the strut. And then we'll do the sway bar end link last, and that'll be it. So that's probably the best way to do this. It's a little pain in the butt, but trust me, if you do it in that order, it makes it a lot easier. Let's do this thing. Now we're ready to put the front suspensions back together for the Miata. You're gonna have to do this in a certain order or you're gonna make life a lot more difficult for yourself. What you're gonna wanna obviously do first is put the ball joint in, secure that just because that bolt goes under the strut, which is extremely hard to do when you put the strut in. Next thing you're gonna do is put your upper control arm back on in this case. Then you can put the strut down through and connect pretty easily. You're gonna have to put a lot of weight down on this lower control arm to wedge it in, but it shouldn't be too bad. At that point, of course, you can do the outer tie rod at any time and the sway bar end links I like to save for last. So pretty straightforward there. Just I'd follow that order to put this thing back together. Let's get into it. We started with the outer tie rod since it's just gonna be hanging out of the way anyway. And just remember on the Miata, the outer tie rod comes up from underneath. So just orient it that way. Make sure you tighten your lock nut down on it and you should be good to go. Time to take care of this ball joint. Got our ball joint installed. You definitely want to do this before you put the strut in there for sure. It's a lot harder when you have the strut to get to this one bolt that goes into the strut perch. All right, let's keep going. All right, we've got everything back together for the passenger side of the Miata. So you can see we have our sway bar end link back here, the upper control arm new and installed, as well as our spring and strut assembly. So everything's good, everything's torqued down to spec. Again, just do it in the order I said. It's pretty much the opposite of easy removal, is easy installation, and you'll have plenty of room to access every bolt and everything you need to tighten. And now the suspension is finished on our Miata. The last thing I have to do is once we get this car lowered back to the ground is remember we left 2 sway bar end links loose to tighten once the car is back on its own weight, so we'll do that at that time.
With the suspension complete, I was starting to get real excited to take this car for a rip. But first, we need to address the brakes and be able to actually stop.
You can see our factory 30-year-old brake line right here. It's definitely, the rubber's a little worn looking, starting to crack a little bit, which is pretty common. This car does have 230,000 plus miles on it. So what we're gonna do is a pretty awesome upgrade. We're gonna install the Flying Miata stainless steel brake line kit for the NA Miata. So here it is, pretty nice, pretty standard. A couple points to help you guys out. Make sure you hit a lot of PB Blaster up in here. It is, again, this car is a little crustier than I expected, so you do not want to break this, you don't want to strip any of this, don't force anything too hard. Working with brake lines especially, you don't ever want to go full caveman on it. You know, you want to go easy, you want to make sure the threading is perfect, you never want to cross thread it. There's all kinds of issues. If these don't seal perfectly, brake fluid's gonna go everywhere and that's not a good time. So take your time with the job, guys. Real easy, basic tools get the job done. Something that you might not have is a flare wrench or line wrench, or I've heard them called a million things. It's these kind of wrenches that are shaped like this. You're gonna need a 10 millimeter for this Miata, but it simply fits over this line here, goes right down on the 10 millimeter nut there, and that's how that works. So this will come in really handy. Some other tools you're gonna need are some various sockets, various wrenches. You're gonna need a hammer and some pliers to pull these little, they're kind of like little tabs that slide in and hold the brake line in place. Those can be stuck on there pretty good, so you're gonna need something to pull those off, or use a screwdriver and a hammer and chip them out. But other than that, pretty straightforward. Fly Miata kit comes with all the hardware you need, which isn't too crazy. It's the line itself, and then of course you get 2 little copper washers here and a banjo bolt that's gonna go on the caliper itself. So make sure you swap that hardware out for the fresh hardware, and that's pretty much it, guys. You're gonna lose a lot of fluid, so have a drip pan or a catch pan underneath. Don't even worry about it. You're gonna have tons of air in your system, obviously, because we're removing brake lines, but when we go to do the pads and rotors later, we're gonna do a brake fluid flush at the end, so all that air is gonna come out, so no worries there. But let's go ahead and change these over. So you want to grab a 17 millimeter, which is the size that'll fit right here on the Flying Miata kit. Get that nice and secure. Sorry, my lighting isn't that great right here, but we're gonna come back in with this guy and continue to tighten. Come back and tighten this down again. Don't go too hardcore. Perfect. And that's our stainless steel line. I'll also show you on the rear because it's a little different because there's a distribution box back there. But there we go, nice and shiny. We're at the passenger rear now on the Miata, and I want to show you the big difference once you get back to this area is this little guy here. It's a brake distribution box. So it does look a little different. If you haven't seen anything like this, don't panic. It's got two mounting screws right here, or two mounting bolts right here with nuts on them. It also has a line, just a regular 10mm coming in from the top, 10mm coming in from the front of the vehicle. You'll need to disconnect those, so it's just, you know, pretty much similar to what we're doing. Just disconnect those two, obviously, and we'll be putting those both in at the same time. It connects to the caliper in much the same way, so no big difference there. Now, your kit should have come with a hard line designated for this job. So you can see here we have our brand new distribution box. What's interesting, it doesn't have two bolt holes, it just has one. So I'm assuming it only uses one of those mounting holes. So we'll have to figure something out there, see how that lines up. Hopefully that's not gonna be an issue, but you got your top entry point there and your one from the front of the vehicle right there. Should just plug and play. Let's give it a shot. You're gonna wanna save these two nuts to take off at the end so you have some resistance when you're taking these two off. So we actually got a little lucky here. One of these studs snapped that holds that distribution block on. And the Flying Miata one only uses the top stud to attach the new distribution block. So, got lucky there, I guess. There are some crusty studs and bolts on this car. I've had a lot of broken stuff, so it's been an adventure. But let's go ahead and put that block back on. It's hard to film this, so I'm just gonna snap that bad boy back on, but it's pretty much the same as what we've been doing. Time to continue with our brake overhaul on the 92 Mazda Miata. We have the Flying Miata stainless steel brake lines installed. Next up, we got rotors, pads, and some delicious new fluid here. So what are we rocking? We've got some blank Power Stop rotors, and we've got some Power Stop track day spec pads, which I've never used before. I've seen some pretty good reviews on them. They were pretty affordable overall, so just keeping your stock brake calipers, I think this is gonna be a pretty aggressive package. And for fluid, one of my tried and true favorites, the RL600 brake fluid by Redline. That should help spice up this Miata's braking capabilities. We're not adding power, guys, we're adding braking. So, gotta start somewhere, right? Gonna have to paint these calipers to really make it look nice though, that's for sure. Time to do the rear brakes in the Miata, and something you need to be aware of before you think you're gonna retract this piston like a regular brake caliper. You need to know there's a 14mm bolt. It's not the one that holds the bracket on for the e-brake, it's the one just above that, kind of more towards the rear of the vehicle. You're gonna pull that off, and there's a little adjustment screw in there that allows you to adjust the tightness, basically of the e-brake and the overall brake caliper. You're gonna unwind that, and you need to use a 4mm Allen key to do that. I'm gonna show you a close-up of what it looks like. That's how you loosen the piston or retract the piston on the Miata. If you try to force this, you can cause all kinds of problems. Don't do that. Use that, and you can push it forward. The way I like to do it is I take all the hardware off and I have the caliper loose. You can do it that way also. And I apply pressure with a caliper retractor tool as I unwind it, and that way it backs off and gives me that extra room to slide the new pads and new rotor on. So just something to be aware of, but let's go ahead and pull the caliper off first. So here's the little 14mm bolt that covers up the adjustment screw, so I just want to show you what that looks like. Usually it's a pretty short bolt with a little washer on there. Goes right on the back of your caliper. Now I'm gonna try to get that adjustment bolt. Let's start moving that around. And at the same time I'm doing that, I like to use your pretty standard brake adjustment tool. You are going to notice there's a lot of play because we still have that Allen key loose in the back. So we need to adjust that back to where this is going to be tight. And if you don't do that, your brake caliper won't be tightened correctly, it won't be adjusted correctly, and your e-brake will also not function correctly. Now you can over tighten this too, much in the same way you can over loosen it or leave it loose. You can tighten this too much and your brakes will always be dragging. So you want to do this, tighten her up nice and good. Okay, see that? I can't even turn the rotor by hand, no matter how much force I put into her. That's gonna be too tight. Obviously your caliper will be dragging its pad the entire time you're driving, and your e-brake will just barely, basically be locked on all the time. So what we need to do is back that up about probably a full turn or so. Should give us enough play. Now if you loosen it too much, your e-brake won't work. Let's see if our rotor spins. That's pretty good. A little bit of drag is good. Awesome, that should be good. Obviously, when you go for your drive or your brakes get, bedded in, everything else, if you're still getting some kind of dragging noises or resistance, or your e-brake's too loose, you can always come back and adjust those. You don't have to take the brake off anymore. You can simply do it on the car. So yeah, you can always come back, just pop that 14mm off. Speaking of which, don't forget to put him back on. Here he is. So just go ahead and put him back on. All right, we're getting ready to bleed the brake system. Big fan of the Motive power bleeder. Used it for just about every car I've ever had. Fantastic operation. But a couple things you wanna make sure that everything's tightened, that we're not gonna leak any brake fluid. Also, we did do all 4 stainless steel brake lines. So when I pressurize this to about, I probably get it up around 15, somewhere in between 10 and 15 PSI. I'm gonna walk around the car and check all my stainless steel brake line connections to make sure they are not leaking, because this is the first time they're gonna see pressure. I've also filled up the system with a known brake fluid that I really like, Redline's RL600. It's a wonderful brake fluid, performance brake fluid. And yeah, this isn't gonna be a track monster or high horsepower car, but using good brake fluid is always a way to go, especially since we upgraded the pads, rotors, and switched to stainless steel brake lines, so why not have a fluid that can match? Let's go ahead and start pumping this up. Okay, now we're gonna walk around the car and inspect our brake lines. I'm gonna disappear for just a moment. Hopefully I come back with a smile on my face. Okay, so far so good. Time to start cracking open brake calipers. You're gonna start with the furthest from your brake master cylinder, which you can see here in the driver's front corner. Bleed that one first. We're gonna see a lot of air, guys, because most of the fluid was drained when we changed the lines, but you're still gonna see a lot of air come out of the system, okay? So I've got a little bottle down here to catch the fluid as we bleed it out. You wanna make sure your hose is airtight. If your hose is loose up here where you're trying to bleed, you're just gonna possibly reintroduce air into the system. Not a good thing. So, here we go. You're just gonna crack the bleeder screw loose, and we should get fluid coming out. Let's check it out. Ooh, I heard a lot of pressure release. Oh, here it comes. You're gonna get a lot of air, guys. Remember, the whole system's at 15 PSI, so the brake fluid is flowing now. You can see it slowly. Now, during this process, as you make your way around the car, the brake fluid's now up to here. As you make your way around the car, you're gonna wanna check to make sure your reservoir hasn't run dry. So if need be, add extra brake fluid, and also just make sure that you have pressure in your bleeder. Sometimes the pressure will leak out and it'll start to decrease, so you're gonna have to give it some more pumps. Just make sure those two things are always present, fluid and pressure.
I'm giving you a call from the dealer service center.
Melody! All right, once the air stops coming out and the fluid is obviously clear because our old fluid's out, you can go ahead and seal this bad boy up. And we're gonna make our way around the car.
After all of this, I found the brake master cylinder to be leaking. So, in went a new one. The fun never stops.